A New Perspective explores breakthrough strategies, techniques, and technologies with leading industry experts to optimize human mind, body, and spirit. A better you enriches the community around you and progressively renews the world. We are a community dedicated to that impact. Welcome to A New Perspective.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to A New Perspective. Very excited for today's podcast. We have Mr. Tommy Sobel in the house. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I have to say, man, of all the podcasts that we've done so far, we've had some wonderful doctors and entrepreneurs and people on here. But I am attracted to your mission in a very big way, excited about the work that you're doing. And I think it's relevant, man. So excited to have you here and dive into what we got going on. So first and foremost, I think you and I are both in businesses that I think are morally good, and we're fighting uphill battles. I think that's part of what attracts me to what you're doing. Is I think we have our work cut out for us in a way that, depending on what metrics you're using to measure, I think ultimately we'll probably lose more people than we'll save, but I think the people that will end up helping will make all the difference too, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I also think of this in phases, especially with something that's so burgeoning like digital wellness, which is this field that we're calling what we do at Brick. Is there's so many people that are seeking to have a better relationship with screens in their phones, and that's phase one. And then phase two are the people who right now are like, that's a cool idea, but I love my phone. I don't want to change anything. My relationship with my phone is fine, thank you. Or they're in denial, and it's kind of like there's an early adopter aspect to, I think, the whole wellness industry, where if you think about it in terms of physical wellness and yoga's been around for thousands of years, perhaps, but it was an Eastern spiritual practice that was
floating around in small circles, and you had to kind of be in a very small in crowd, and then I don't know how it exploded on that. Maybe Bikram brought it to the mainstream.
Yeah, and it's only in the last 15, 20 years, or maybe even less, that it's become secularized, and because people are starting to realize that there's scientific benefits, that actually helps boost your immunity and helps your sleep and productivity and clarity of mind. And so it started with those early adopters in different spiritual communities, and it's now much broader. And totally. I think wellness as a whole is blossoming in that way.
Totally. Yeah, man. I think, not to be fatalistic about it, I should quantify what I'm saying. I think, the first conversation you and I had where we were both kind of going through, you said something that's stuck with me the whole time, where I think a lot of us feel, at least for me, I can say, I have a relationship where I'm sucked into technology more than I'd like to be. But everybody kind of thinks it's their own private struggle. And I don't know that everybody, you don't really go talk about your own, airing your dirty laundry. I'm sucked into my social media or whatever else way too much. But hearing you say man, I was really struggling with this. And then I come to find out everybody else is having the same struggle as me. That was something I don't know, man. I think that's very, very, very relevant in today's growing social media world and everything else. I love, so how did this happen? How did you get into this world? I guess that's probably where we should start.
Yeah, well, first, I have a background in neuroscience, and so I was doing neuroscience research for a number of years, and then I very serendipitously was offered a job at a film studio at DreamWorks Studios, and about 5 years into that, was promoted to a new position as the new media junior executive. So my task was to figure out what we were going to do on digital platforms. What are we going to do on Snapchat and YouTube and Facebook beyond just what we were doing with film and TV? And it was through this exploratory position over the course of 2 years that I got to know a bunch of influencers, for lack of a better word, or people who were really successful at social media and they built their businesses on it. And they revealed to me were incredibly anxious and isolated and felt these obligations to be on their phones 24/7. And this gets to what you were just describing, where at the time, this was like 2015 to 2017, I knew that I had compulsions to check my phone constantly, that it was making me irritable and anxious, and that I would wake up in the middle of the night to check my phone just to see if I got an email from somebody who was in a different time zone. And I knew I wasn't really in control of my phone habits, but I thought that it was just my personal, shameful, embarrassing problem. I didn't realize that other people were struggling with it too. And so as I was getting to know these kids who were younger than me, who were sharing their experience with it, with all these hooks, these feelings of obligation to be on it, and the psychological consequences, I realized that it was this epidemic that nobody was really talking about at the time. And that's really how Brick started, where it was a personal challenge to myself. Can I turn my phone into a brick for an hour a day and do something in the real world that's meaningful to me? And it was basically the first rudimentary habit based on what I knew about behavior change and habit reformation from my neuroscience background. And so that started working for me, and I started sharing it with others. Can you turn your phone into a brick for an hour a day for a week? Let me know how it goes. And it was working for them too. They started to feel differently about their relationship with their phone. Two of them even ended up deleting Instagram because they realized that it actually wasn't making them feel good. Which wasn't my intention, of course, but it was allowing them to establish some self-awareness and feel the difference between compulsive use and intentional use. And so, yeah, that's really how Brick started, where they were like, it was really interesting, but it would be so great if we could do this with other people. And so I started throwing these phone-free gatherings. It started off as like dinner parties and game nights, and then just blew up into huge takeovers of venues, often with a focus of wellness, but always to create more meaningful connections.
Totally.
And that was like 2.5 years ago, the start of the Brick community.
That's awesome, man. That's a cool little organic growth. I mean, so I see, I guess, like, I think maybe me and you are in like the middle generation of like people that grew up in a world that wasn't super tech heavy, and then also like came with the evolution. I don't actually know how old you are, but I at least like I grew up where we played outside until the streetlights came on. That was like normal. And then I remember having my first cell phone with like the Nokia brick phone that had like Snake on it, and that was fun for like all of 10 minutes, and then you wanted to stop playing anyways. And then, and so I remember the transition to Facebook. I started using Facebook originally for like connecting with friends from high school and like staying connected. But it wasn't this like weaponized business engine where like they were targeting all of my favorite likes and like advertising the things that were most likely to get me to buy. It was more of like my aunt was posting like, my cousin's photos, and it was just like fun. And I watched the evolution, and I guess the interesting, like when I look at like my parents' generation, it's not like hard for them at all to have like phone free time. Like that's like their norm. Their norm is like, yeah, we just want to connect and have like game night or like do whatever. It's my younger siblings' generation who grew up like between me and my youngest sister, there's an 8-year difference. And even in that 8-year span, it is a radical difference in the way that we grew up with technology. And so for a lot of the younger generation that I see that grew up in a world of making friends through social media, where it wasn't like, hey, I'm Joe, like, let me shake your hand. Like, what's up, man? Like, what are you about? Or like, I can scope out your or dating, right? Like this world of dating now where I'm able to swipe 100 different people a day versus like just the casual, like, oh, like you're a friend of so-and-so. It's like, oh, hey, I'm Joe. Like that world seems to be diminishing more and more and more and more. And then for this younger generation who grew up just not even in it, like that's kind of the crew that I'm more like, what is the future for these people that don't even remember a world where we didn't use our phones all the time. Have you encountered, I mean, I'm sure you're interfacing with these people. Like how has that been for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's scary. I mean, just like you said, we're in a situation where we're kind of straddling the line, as I'll call us both millennials, and we knew we our brains developed pre-smartphone, and the kids, their brains are developing in this hyper stimulated dopamine driven world, and that is changing the shape of their brains and their social structures. It's definitely happening. The problem is, I mean, nobody knows what the long term results are going to be. Even the people that designed these things don't know what's happening, and many of them have even said that it's out of control. And many of the people that designed these apps and these phones don't even let their own families use the technologies that they develop. And so,
Yeah, I heard Bill Gates is limiting his kids' use to 2 hours a day on their phones.
yeah,
Which is interesting to.
yeah. Also, Tim Cook, I think he does the same thing with his family, and Steve Jobs even notoriously didn't give his kids iPads when they came out. But yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, I think that often the conversation goes to, oh my God, it's all about the kids. The kids are all screwed up. I think that, yes, that's really scary, but I had this problem like to the max myself. Like,
Sure.
I can't pretend that it's a kid problem. Like, this was my problem. And now that I'm a digital wellness coach and I'm helping people improve their phone habits, and I can share more about that, I have a lot of clients that are in their 60s that are like mothers that are now empty nesters, where their kids are now in college, and they are now trying to figure out how to stop sending their daughters, news articles, all day. And they're constantly just trying to help. And so this is a multi-generational problem. And
Totally.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely going to be a much bigger issue in the future. I think that what you were describing growing up is, very similarly, like, I didn't have a smartphone until I was out of college. Like, it's completely different social realm. And I had AIM, like starting in like 6th grade, I think. And we would use chats and messaging. We would use the internet, but that was the, 1 to 2 hours a day. It was scheduled.
Totally.
Like, I think you talked about in one of our previous calls too, like the internet time or the digital time was scheduled. Now, cut to 25 years later, we need to schedule the digital free time. We need to schedule the phone free or the screen free time, because if we don't, that's where we're seeing all of these mental health consequences. And so it's really unfortunate, but if we don't structure screen free time into our day, that's where we're seeing the rise in loneliness and anxiety and depression, and even potential connection to an increase in suicide rates.
Yeah.
The more time you spend on your phone, the more likely you are to be depressed.
Totally. Well, and so I see it, and I'd love to dive into the neuroscience side, because I know that's something you and I both have a passion for. In human beings, right, we have this brain that's been evolving over 100,000 years, and so we have this hardware system that is slowly growing and changing and developing and adapting over time. And a lot of the hardware is hardware that we've had for a long time, and it's there's always the argument of like nature versus nurture, and I think they go kind of hand in glove, where your behavior influences your neurochemistry. To say the actual neural connections physically that are made in your brain are radically influenced every day by the behavioral habit patterns that you exhibit. And so it's almost like where if you have like a blank canvas and you start walking down a path, that path gets more well-worn, and it's easier to walk down that path the second time, and then the 8th time, and then the 100th time. And so you start forming these neural connections, and so it's like we get into these behavior cycles that make it so much easier to go gravitate towards that thing. And then you look at addictive behavior and all those things. And man, you've touched on so many things where part of where I think, the capital, and the nature of capitalism, right, is like profit is our motive to go out there and generate profit and income. And so the people that are building these engines are looking to, how can I grab the most attention possible? How can I keep somebody's engagement for as long as possible? Because ultimately that's what drives the bottom line. And I don't know if you ever, there's a book that I really liked called Actionable Gamification by Yu-Kai Chow.
Yeah, it's great. I read it.
Yeah. So
Octalysis Prime.
yeah, exactly. And he basically gives you the framework for how to gamify your attention, right? And to have these drivers. And there's so many of these behavior mechanics that are built into our social engines that get you to click one more time and stay a little bit longer and hit those mental hot buttons of like staying engaged and all those things. And I just think like we're radically unprepared. Like this thing that kind of started as, seemingly innocuous of like me looking at my cousin's photos. And I guess maybe there's a good segue. I don't want to paint it with a broad brush of like it's all bad, because it's certainly not, right? Like to your point of like, I usually don't talk about things on the podcast that date it and make it, you can tell when I like to keep it as evergreen as I can. But I think this is relevant. I mean, we're in the middle of this pandemic with the coronavirus going around. And even though this will be something that subsides, it seems like there's always a reason on the news cycle to stay plugged in, whether it's, politics going crazy, or the, hurricane or earthquake or this murder over here. Like there's always a reason to say like, oh man, I have to stay informed. I have to stay plugged in. My friends are doing what? Like, and so I guess there's always the argument to be made for, I'm getting benefit here. I'm learning. I'm whatever in some way. So and I know you're not an advocate of saying like the phone is bad. One of the things I really like about your message is you're not here to preach doom and gloom around like, oh, don't use it. It's as a tool that's hijacking your neurochemistry in a negative way. Even though I think more often than not, I think a lot of our behaviors tend towards addictive. I think just because it's engineered that way. But also I love that your message is like, just start with an hour. And I don't know if you've grown from there, but yeah, man, I don't know what the answer is. It's like there's so much there for sure.
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of foods and diets, and everybody needs to eat, but a lot of people have an issue with overeating, and a lot of people have an issue with eating nutritional food and eating junk food all the time. And so what we're kind of saying is, let's use news as the example. Many of us today are over consuming the news. Now, we're not saying don't check the news. Like, we're not saying don't eat. We're saying eat, but you don't want to be eating dessert for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You don't want to be having donuts, multiple times a day. If you're going to have a donut, why don't you have it for dessert, like after you've had a meal? And I think that, when you don't eat well, that causes consequences. You can do it once or twice, but you actually feel worse when you're like, oh my God, why did I just have that donut for breakfast? And so I think that the news it's a great analogy for what we're dealing with right now, where we're kind of preaching balance and saying, okay, you do want to stay informed, and let's balance you being informed with you being a productive and intentional person. If you're checking the news 10 times a day and it's making you feel worse and you're not feeling productive, that's over consuming the news. And so what we're about and what we teach in the BRIC method is, how can you regain conscious control over your news checking habit so that you can check it only when it's intentional and not when it's unintentional? How can I make sure, let's say, I think a great estimate is like checking the news twice a day. The news doesn't really change that much. Notoriously, what is it called? The 24/7 news cycle or the emergency alerts are often incorrect anyway. And so getting the most recent news constantly, is proven to not actually be the best way to get news. So let's say the ideal amount of time to check the news just twice a day, morning and in the evening. Just like you might say the ideal number of times to eat unhealthy snacks is like just once for dessert after dinner. And so then the question becomes, okay, how can I only check the news twice a day? When I've been, what you start to realize when you ask yourself that question is you're feeling certain impulses to check, and those impulses are being followed through. They're not being counteracted by what we call conscious control. And conscious control is the ability to say no to an unwanted behavior. So if you've made the decision that I only want to check the news twice today, and you've already checked it once this morning, and you're trying to write an email, and you're reaching out to check, if you still check the news, that's low conscious control. And what we teach in the BRIC method is to check the news more intentionally, to continue using this example, or to use social media or email or any of these things more intentionally in a way that serves you instead of you serving it. It's not a question of willpower. It's not a question of grit. Really all it is, it's about beating the urge. And so if you can find a way to beat the urge and not check the news when you're feeling that impulse to check, then what you start to do is you build that new pathway. So what you were just describing there of every time you do a repeated behavior, you do a habit, you are walking down that same path. Every time you feel an urge and you don't follow through on the behavior, so in this case, you feel the urge to check the news, but you're able to withhold doing it, which we teach methods of how to do that, you're actually creating a new path. And this is what's called, to get into the neuroscience, Hebb's law in the brain, where they say that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're feeling an urge to check the news, and then you do the behavior of checking the news, those two sets of neurons are firing together and they're wiring together, and you're strengthening that neural pathway. Now, if you are feeling that, now secondly, the second part of Hebb's law is that neurons that fire apart wire apart. And so if you feel that urge to check your phone, but you don't check your phone, or you do a different behavior, like let's say take a deep breath, we have this thing called the BRIC breath in the BRIC method that we teach, then you're actually no longer linking the neurons of feeling the urge to checking the news. And you're now linking it to perhaps this new behavior that we call the replacement reward. Neurons that are out of sync can't link. And so, yeah, from a neuronal perspective, that's the basics of how we help people beat the urge. And yeah, I mean, I just kind of.
Man, that's incredible, man. It's funny because I feel like you and I have recognized the same problem that's happening sociologically around us. My approach to it was one of the first products that we developed in my company, Aneu, is a nootropic, right? It's a daytime nootropic that has a bunch of adaptogenic herbs. It's designed to help improve focus, and it's really something for your hardware in your brain.
Is that this?
Exactly. Hey, exactly. Yeah. Hold on, I got to get you back on camera with that. Hold that bad boy up. Yeah. So, I mean, and there's so many great things like lion's mane mushrooms in there that are showing these cool studies around, neurogenesis and helping with making those neural connections. But the reality of it is I've recognized from the very beginning of our business model that if I give you a bunch of enhanced ability to focus, and you focus more on using social media and just being distracted on your phone, you're going to wire a bunch of bad connections more aggressively. And so I do think that it needs to be this hand-in-hand thing of truly software around behavior patterns, creating new habits, and then recognizing, okay, I'm out of sync here. I'm having this urge that I know deep down I don't want to give into. And then boom, like I have a pattern interrupt where I'm going to do something different. And then also, having like a short cycle on a nootropic to help kind of increase willpower, increase your ability to focus. Those things I think are really great. But man, you just touched on so much good stuff there. I think let's dive into the BRIC method, man, because I think I'll share this as you dive into it. But so a little bit on your journey. So neuroscience background. I know you dive into a business essentially where you're with a lot of people that are, I shouldn't even use I want to say air quotes, successful in social media. And I only say that because my sister is an influencer. She was Miss Rockstar Energy Drink, Miss Professional Bull Rider. She has, hundreds, a lot of 90,000 followers, whatever it is. People have more than her. And she is somebody who gets paid to be on social media. And by her own admission, last week, she came and stayed with me out here in Austin. And she was just like, I was telling her about my podcast with you, and she's like, I need to listen to that. I'm so excited for it. So this is one of those.
She's listening right now.
I know she will be. She will be. But I think this is one of those things where it's like, you become more successful and you're more tethered to it. Where it's a challenge, I think, for a lot of people that I think there's almost some benefit to not being Insta famous, right? Where it's like now I'm not having to show up for an audience on a regular basis. I have to maintain the algorithm. I've got to post every so often. And I'm sure there's successful ways to do that. But
yeah, I think it just means that those who have their business in this space need to acknowledge that they're being bombarded by behavioral hooks that are trying to get them to spend as much time in it as possible. And it's kind of like, to again use the analogy of food, like when you think of a chef, like a classic chef that comes to mind, what do you think of? You think of like a fat white guy in a chef's hat. And that's because the average baker was just surrounded by good food all the time. And so they gained weight. And that's kind of like what we're seeing now, where a lot of these people that are like, oh, I have to be on it 24/7, or feel this obligation to keep up with their fans in the comments and create content every day and make your grid perfect. Those obligations have their own consequences. And so it's even more essential for them to have a screen-free practice or have a digital wellness practice than the average person who's just using it for recreation.
Totally. Well, let's dive into the brick method, man. I actually have, I went to your website. I've been kicking the tires on doing some of this stuff, and I have to say I love it. And so I'll share a little bit on my experience as you, I guess, dive into some of this stuff. But for somebody who is interested in just the starting line, getting to, okay, if I'm going to start taking back control of my own attention span and be more aware of how I'm spending my energy and focus, how would you have somebody start out on this journey?
I think it always starts by getting a baseline, getting an understanding of where you are. And what we have on our website and something we could even do now if you were interested is we have this thing called the Conscious Control Survey, and that allows you to get a sense of how much of your phone use is impulsive and how much control you have over it. And once you there's different categories. There's strong conscious control, which means you're basically in control of most of your behaviors. There might be kind of mild dependency. And then there's impaired conscious control, which means you're in control of some behaviors but not others. Your relationship with your phone might be frustrating, or it might feel like an annoyance to you. And then there's weak conscious control, which means that you really aren't in control of most of your behaviors. Your phone is in control more than you are, and it's a highly dysfunctional relationship, and it's probably it's impeding your ability to live a fulfilling, meaningful life. So that can be, it's like our version of screen time, where it's important to know kind of where you're at to then realize how much of an issue this is for you. I think a lot of people think that, oh yeah, I wish I could spend, like, people kind of have this love-hate relationship with their phone, and they kind of wish they could throw it into the ocean every once in a while. But
For sure.
Realizing that it does actually impede, have a lot of these negative consequences is the first step to being motivated to change.
Well, and I think like meaningful connection, man, I've seen a few studies that show just meaningful connection rather than a lot of like quantitative connections, but qualitative connections, right? Where you really interface with somebody and you feel like you're seen and you're heard and you're known and you get to feel that from somebody else, has a marked difference in how you feel about yourself and the world and humanity and all this stuff. In a lot of ways, I think, we have a lot of quantitative connections where I know I have I have 5,000 Facebook friends and another 2,000 waiting that I can't accept. And I now know less of them than ever. And I have, and so it's one of those like, I don't know. I think that's one of the things that I think we're missing a lot in today's world. So take the survey as kind of step one, establish a baseline. Is that on your website?
Yeah, it's on our website. You can find out if you're in control of your phone or your phone controls you. That's a great place to start.
Okay.
And the one thing I will say about what you were saying is, Mark Zuckerberg, his goal was to connect the world with Facebook, and we're now all connected. We can reach out or DM anybody we want in the world, from a politician to a celebrity to anybody. And the problem is that we've now replaced these real world relationships with these relationships through our devices. And what we're learning is that you can only get dopamine through the phone or through social media. And dopamine is it's like candy for your brain. It's like the donut for your brain. And it's this endless searching neurochemical. So no matter how many friends you have on Facebook, or how many likes or comments or people that swiped right and matched with you, it's never enough. Dopamine is it's not fulfilling, and so that's why we found ourselves kind of in this digital rat race of always wanting more, and that's by design, because the more time we spend on it, the more attention we spend, the more ads they can sell. I mean, all they want is more, more, more. That's the attention economy. And so what we need to, we need to acknowledge that's that's the game that we're playing whenever we are on these apps. And also realizing that it's only with face-to-face connection and real-world connection that you can also get oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is the group bonding neurochemical that is released when you're making out, or when you're making more meaningful connections and during childbirth. And so what we try to do at the Brick events is offer opportunities off the grid to allow people to make these more meaningful connections and create that oxytocin, the true feeling of connection, so that when they do go back to their phone and they go back to Instagram or whatever it is, yeah, they might use it, they might enjoy it, but they don't, that candy isn't as desirable, because they've just had this full meal.
Totally.
So they don't need to binge it.
I want to dive into this, but just on that note, man, I read this book from Aziz Ansari. It's going to sound funny, but Aziz Ansari wrote a book called, I think, Modern Romance. And it's funny that it's from Aziz, who's like a comedian, but it's actually very well written and very well researched. I've heard,
yeah. I want to read it.
And but one of the things that he talks about in there is just how much the dating world has changed because of these apps, where if you go back 2 generations ago, just like my grandparents' generation, the top 2 determining factors of who you ended up marrying was, number 1, geography. You typically married somebody from your neighborhood, or number 2, what church you went to. So like those 2 determining factors had like an 80% chance of determining who you ended up spending your entire life being married to. And so he calls it the burden of choice, where more choices doesn't equal more freedom. And so there's this weird paradox where you think like, oh, like the more options that I have, the better, right? Just because, but if just to use his example, like let's say there's only 6 viable candidates, for you to, from your neighborhood and your church that you're like, okay, like he's a definite no, definitely not, maybe, oh wow, like he's great. And so like, it's so easy when you make your choice to feel like I made the best choice. I stand by my decision and I feel great about this, and I'm not looking back, and I'm not worried about like what else is out there, and is this the best I'm going to find? And I think in today, if you're swiping 100 people a day, how on earth do you ever feel confident in your decision? Because it's like, well, and your search area has gone, like I could swipe in Nigeria if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Like I have the whole globe at my fingertips. So it's such a weird time where I think like limiting our own choice and recognizing like more doesn't always equal better is a good thing.
Yeah, it's the globalization of dating.
Yeah. Which is crazy.
It's relative, right? Like you it's also used not necessarily with dating, but like, you know, humans have been comparing each other's fitness since the beginning of time, and that is, you know, fitness in terms of like an evolutionary sense is important because it helps determine, uh, you know, sexual interest and you know who you're going to choose as a partner. And you know, for instance, like girls used to compare themselves to everybody else at their high school or at their middle school, and like wanting to know where they fit in the hierarchy of, you know, who's the hottest girl in the school. And guys would do that too. And maybe every once in a while you would see like a 17 magazine, you know, at the checkout counter at the grocery store, but you were kind of in this closed loop of the people that, yeah, were in your community. But now it's, again, like it's the globalization of dating. Like now it's a worldwide community. So you're seeing on Instagram and TikTok and everything, like not just the hottest people in your school, but the hottest 100 people, 1,000 people in the world. And you're comparing, and those people also don't even look the way that they look on Instagram because they're using Facetune and so
Filters
it's the
and everything. Yeah.
filters and take, you know, posting the one photo out of the 1,000 they took on the beach in that one pose. And so it is the most impossible of impossible standards where we are truly comparing our reality to everyone else's external selects. And so that I think is part of the negative mental health consequences that we're seeing, where like it's a lot more pressure to play in this globalized world, you know, world where the playing field has been opened up, and not just, you know, within our own personal communities. And you know, there's benefits to it too, but I think again, just acknowledging that. And I think also like with the brick method and what we do ultimately is everything that we're doing. Social media is not reality. It's an alternate reality. Even the people who look like they're having a great time, or, you know, posting, like they're usually not. We know how fraudulent so much of these posts are, and so I think that we, as we spend more and more time in this alternate reality, just continuing to set an anchor and remind ourselves of what is real and what is not real. I mean, even just the news itself. I don't know if you did this when you were in school, but I had to do a project where we would have to look at the same news piece from 15 different publications and look at the difference between them, and the amount of bias between the 15 articles talking about the same event was like, the spectrum was incredible of like it being written as like a completely positive event to an incredibly negative event. And so even the news is not reality, it's an alternate reality. And I think that as we spend more and more time in this alternate reality, regrounding ourselves in reality, what is real? Like me reading a book, or me spending time with my girlfriend, or me breathing and meditating and feeling my body, like that's reality. There's everything else is an artifact. It's an extension of that.
Well, and you bring up something that I think is super salient, man, because I think, and maybe I'm nostalgic, and we could never, maybe it was never this way, but I just imagined it because I'm nostalgic. But I feel like our ability to trust our news organs now is so diminished, where I don't even, you know, like we're in the middle of a pandemic right now and I don't know what to believe. I don't know who's like, I watch the news And I don't have time to go to 15 different sources to try to figure out what's real. Politics, you got like just talking heads on both sides, and it's very difficult to like separate the wheat from the chaff. And you bring up something that I think is so relevant. It's like listening to your own internal voice, listening to that thing in you that is, and like turning off, I think, just the noise that's out there and being able to like have an internal compass that's pointing somewhere that you listen to. That's wonderful. So let's dive into that. Let's say you set a baseline. You go to gobricknow.com.
Yeah, gobricknow.com.
And
find out what your conscious control is. And then we basically, I'm just looking at our workbook right here. So we go through a series of exercises that allow you to increase your conscious control and beat the urge. And it's basically split up into 3 steps, where the first step is first understanding what your cravings and urges are to check the phone for a particular bad habit. So like the news is a great example of that. So what are your urges and cravings? What are your triggers that get you to check the news? And without actually having to change anything, but there's typically an emotional component. I have not yet experienced a trigger that does not include any internal emotional component, where it be a feeling of frustration that you're not able to do, not able to help, or feeling loneliness or anxiety. There's always some trigger emotion that gets you to act out, so to speak, and check the news or use your phone in a way that's maladaptive. And so in the first step, we help you build a personal relationship with that trigger, a self-awareness of it, so that you can be more aware when it comes up. And the conscious control survey is actually the beginning of that step. And then in the second step, we teach what are called the phone smart habits. And so, these phones and the apps on them have been designed to be smarter than us. And the phone smart habits are a series of digital wellness habits. It's a template for healthier habits that allow you to learn to be smarter than your phone. And so we have a series of 12 habits that we teach in the BRIC method. I'll give you one of them. One is, so many of us use our phone as an alarm clock in the morning. I don't know, do you do that?
I do, yeah, for sure.
The problem with that is that we used to think that our brains rested when we rest at night, when we sleep. And what we now know is that the brain is actually just as active, if not more active, when we sleep. And it's consolidating memories, it's rebalancing neurotransmitters, it's actually the subconscious mind is working to help solve problems for the next day or the next week. And so when you wake up, you're actually in this very creative right brain flowy state where you're able to take what you learned in the dream state and make it actionable in the day, and like set an intention and be purposeful. But you're also highly suggestible.
Yeah, man, I definitely use my phone as an alarm, and my first reaction every morning is I pick up my phone, turn my alarm off, and then I get a flood of notifications of a million things going on, whether it's my Twitter feed blowing up or news, the world's melting down, or whatever else that I'm sure that is not the best place to put my brain in first thing in the morning. But yeah, do you have any data on that?
Yeah, so I mean, what that does, it does a bunch of things, but one is that it switches you out of that right brain creative space into a left brain, like get things done space. They say that your email is basically everyone else's to-do list for you. So suddenly your subconscious mind is switching over to, okay, that's a news article I need to read. That's a person I need to respond back to. That's a project I need to send to somebody. And suddenly you're now battling back what everyone else is asking of you, instead of allowing the opportunity in this foundational moment of your day to say, like, what are the top 3 most important things that I want to accomplish today, or that I want to do? And you're also reinforcing this behavior that when your phone is pinging you or is messaging you, that it's in charge. You're reinforcing that behavior that when your phone has something for you, you're going to check it, not you checking your phone when you want to check it. And so what we are, the first phone smart habit we share is that the first hour of your day should be phone free. And this is something that a lot of people have to work up to. Maybe they start with 20 minutes that is phone free. But I noticed that for myself, when I started spending my first 20 minutes, hour of my day without my phone, I had so much less anticipatory anxiety for my day. I was able to, and what I do is I just recommend this $8 alarm clock, battery powered alarm clock, analog on Amazon. And it allows me to charge my phone at my office desk in the other room. And some people can't necessarily charge their phone in a different room, but at least having it out of reach while you're in bed is key. And so what I started to do on my perfect day is I wake up to my alarm, my battery powered alarm clock. I meditate, I shower, I get dressed, I make breakfast, I make my coffee, and then I sit down at my desk. And I'll even have already written down what my top 3 priorities are for the day before I see any of the messages or DMs on my phone and on my computer. And so what I've done by that point, and that could be sometimes now an hour and a half into my day, is I've already set up this positive momentum for productivity, where I've already done everything I need to do for myself so that no matter what's coming at me, no matter how bad the news is, I already know that I'm ready to attack it. I'm ready to take it on. And I'm able also to say no to the things that are not aligned with my priorities. So if it's like somebody wants to set up a phone call or some immediate urgent ask, I'm able to compare their urgency with my priorities instead of just assuming that all the 15 messages that I get, I need to respond to all of them immediately.
Totally.
So that's the first phone smart habit. And again, we have 12 of them. And so the purpose of sharing that and that step 2 is that we allow you to then model that serves as a model for the positive habits that you can stretch and start to work towards. And then in step 3, we start to actually beat the urge. So in step 1, you've established what your urges are for your bad habits. In step 2, you've learned what positive habits you want to replace that bad habit with. And then in step 3, we teach you what we call the pattern interrupt and the replacement reward, which is the brick breath. And it's an incredible tool that allows you to switch out of that what we call sympathetic dominance, that fight, flight, and the stress response that our phones give us, and out of that impulse thinking, the frame of mind, and allows us to take a second and have that conscious control to say, do I really want to check the news right now? Do I really want to check my phone right now? And maybe sometimes you will. Maybe sometimes you'll do the brick breath and you'll take a moment. But it might be 3 out of the 15 times you feel the urge instead of 15 out of the 15.
Totally.
So,
I think it's worth saying here too. Like, I know there's just from the nature of how many listeners are here, there's going to be a lot of people that say like, I have, anxiety just thinking about putting my phone in another room and I like doing it. But I think it's worth mentioning, like, donuts are delicious, right? Like, there isn't anybody that's like, oh man, like, I just have it. Like, I don't even like donuts. Like, everybody loves donuts. So I think it's trading the small dopamine hit for the long-term, vegetables that, like, man, my body's going to be so much better if I just eat these things. And that's the reality. I think all of us can kind of relate with, like, I don't like this morning I woke up and it was still dark out. And it was like the easiest thing in the world to just like, I don't want to get out of bed. This bed is so warm. I don't want to leave this thing. But like getting up, putting on my running shoes and going for a run. Afterwards, I felt like amazing. Felt like, oh, I'm a champion. I did it. I went and made myself do this thing. And that's like eating veggies. That's doing the deal. And I think like the more days that you can stack together where we're intentional about your morning. I love your morning, like, wake up and do a meditation, into a shower, into a little coffee, have a little me time. I like to read. I do my nonfiction in the morning and I do fiction at night when I read. And that's awesome. Like starts my day on the absolute best place ever. But I love that. That's where you feel like you're in control and you're on a good trajectory and your life has, you're doing what you want to do. Tell, if you would, Dan, one of the things that I did that I took from your website was the auto response. And I know that's like a little hack that you guys have in taking control. I just texted you right now and noticed that it's on your phone, which is great.
Oh yeah, did you?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I did my own little version of it, and it has been the best. I'll have you explain it, and then I'll tell you what I'm getting out of it. But
okay, great. Yeah, we call it brick mode, and basically it's message auto reply, so that whenever you are choosing to be off your phone, anybody that texts you gets an auto reply saying, in my case, it's, hey, I'm in brick mode. I'm not to enjoy the real world. I'll get this when I'm back on my phone. And so the purpose of that is twofold. Me, as a person who's trying to spend time off my phone, I don't feel that obligation to be on it, because I know that anybody that reaches out to me knows that I'm not checking. And so that ticking clock hasn't started it's like an out of office for your text message. And the person who's texting, it feels way better to get that response than to think that they're being ignored. Like, that those people who are like, hey, did you get my text 5 hours ago? And it's like, dude, chill.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't need to do that anymore. It kind of relieves that pressure that we've been feeling in this always on world that exists right now. It's great because it's starting to trying to make that normal, that we don't need to be available to people all the time, even if it is during business hours. Like the especially people that are in creative fields, and especially during this time now where we're kind of locked onto screens, working from home is that's all input. Every time you check the news, every time you get an email, every phone call, that's all input. And where's the time for the output? How the unstimulated mind is the most creative mind. And so if you're somebody that is trying to write a book or a million examples, it's very difficult to do that if intermittently throughout the day, 100 times a day, you're getting all these different notifications and texts. And so brick mode, that's another one of the phone smart habits, to publicize the time when you're phone free so that it relieves you of that pressure. And that's something you can set up really quickly on our website too.
That's something that honestly I didn't even know was a point of like contention for me until I just did it. I mean, I was like, hey, I'm going to throw this on. And for me at least, I didn't even realize I had anxiety around, oh gosh, I've got 10 text messages that have been stacking up on my phone that I haven't responded to. I had actually a buddy of mine, this was a little while ago now, but we actually got in he was mad at me because he sent me a message on Telegram. And I'm like, dude, I got like barely enough bandwidth for like email, Facebook, Instagram, like my actual text message. You're sending me stuff on WhatsApp or Telegram, dude. Like, there's a 0.0% chance I'm getting back to you on that. And he was just like, dude, I sent it to you. You didn't get back to me for 2 days. And I'm like, why? First off, text me. Second off, like, I can't. But just putting on this brick mode and being able to have the auto response go back to somebody saying, hey, I'm tech free at the moment. I'm out enjoying the real world. And as soon as I see this, I'll ping you back. Now, it put this little bit of distance between me and this pressure to have to respond that I didn't even realize I was craving. It was like this thing I used to have in my life that I somehow lost, and I didn't even realize I'd lost it until I got it back again, which is so great.
Yeah, you're back in control.
Yeah.
That's what we really want. And that's kind of the power of technology when we're wielding it in a healthy way, is that it's this incredible tool, but we need to control it. We don't want it to control us. And so brick mode is just one of a number of ways that we can help people feel that control and what we call digital wellness. So that's so cool that you had that experience with it. Dude,
I've been loving it. I'm gonna become a promoter here pretty soon.
Yeah, well, clearly.
Yeah. One of the things in our first conversation that I would love for you to touch on is, so, effectively, you talked about like the gym, right? Like, 50 years ago, culturally, we lived in a society where, you know, paying for a membership to a place to work out was unheard of because
Yeah.
our lifestyle was much more physically laborious than it is now. And so you just, by the nature of living, were physically active. And in today's day and age, most of us sit in a chair for most of the day. We have these sedentary lifestyles. And so now we have to consciously make time for physical exertion if we want to have an optimized body and mind and health and all this stuff. And you actually had a few different pillars. The physical health was one pillar of it, and I know digital wellness is another. But if you could speak to just kind of how that thing is in your mind, that was really, really on point.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think, yeah, so what you're describing is physical exercise or physical wellness. And, 50 years ago, uh, Nike didn't exist. There were no running shoes. Nobody went outside and strapped on running shoes and went for a run specifically for physical wellness, because people's lives, as you were saying, already had fewer conveniences. So they were more physically active by default. Over the last 50, 60 years, our lives have become much more convenient with public transportation and personal transportation and a bunch of other things. And so, yeah, our lives have become more sedentary, and we're seeing the consequences now in the science to our sleep and our creativity and our productivity and our weight if we don't carve out physical wellness into our day. I mean, it takes work to go to the gym, but now there's gym memberships across the world, and yoga studios everywhere. And so I think of that as the first pillar of wellness. And then more recently, we've had this burgeoning of emotional wellness, where meditation and even therapy has become less taboo over the last decade or plus than it used to be. And you need to carve that time into your day. Otherwise, you might, be living your life, with negative thoughts and not living to your living your best life, up to your potential. And then there's also been nutritional wellness, where if you don't look at the label of what you're eating, then you might just be eating junk food all the time. And you actually have to work to make sure that you're staying aligned with your specific healthy diet, whether it's paleo or vegetarian or any of that. And so, and then I think of digital wellness as the fourth pillar of wellness, where you actually need to carve out that screen-free time for your mental health. And it's only with all of those four pillars combined that you have a wellness lifestyle. And it takes work. It's because our lives have been so convenient. It's so weird that you have to decide whether you're going to eat apple or this organic apple. Like 50 years ago, they were just apples. You didn't have to decide. And so it's work. And some people aren't doing that work, but for the people who are, that want to maximize and optimize their potential, these are the four pillars I think that we now need to work on. I think that the first three have been known for years now, and digital wellness is this kind of burgeoning one where it's like, wait a second, we're spending so much time on our phones and on screens. Is that really what I want to do? Is this really benefiting me? Or has it plateaued? And are there negative consequences that I want to be looking at? And how can I rebalance my relationship so I'm in control and using it in a way that makes me feel good? That's what we really want to do. With the BRIC method and with the BRIC community, the solution is not to become Amish and disavow all technology. It's can we use our phones and screens in a way that makes us feel good? And so that's the message that we're trying to put out into the world. And our mission is basically to make simple screen-free habits as common as brushing your teeth every day, to make people more present and more connected, and that's the work, like you're saying.
I love it, man. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of those things. It's like yoga, like when, flexibility. Like you don't know how much you need it until you get just a little bit more of it, and then you
Yeah.
realize like, where has this been? I think I really see the work you're doing, man. I'll make it poetic here as we'll go out on a little poetic note, but what I think you're doing reminds me of this kind of old proverb of this. Let's see if I can get this right. There's an old man walking down a beach with his grandson, and on this beach there's tens of thousands of starfish washed up on the sand. And there's some tide that was pushing all the starfish in, and this grandson is running down the beach and he's grabbing a starfish and he's hucking it back into the ocean, throwing it in. And every 20 feet or so, as the old man keeps walking down the beach, he's kind of ignoring all these starfish, and this little boy keeps running up and hucking as many of them as he can back into the ocean so they don't dry out on the sand. And finally his grandfather says to him, like, hey, there's tens of thousands of these starfish here. What you're doing is really not going to make a huge difference here, throwing these handfuls in. And the little boy picks up the starfish and he says, to this one, it makes all the difference. And he keeps hucking them back in. And so I really see, man, like, I think we're fighting an uphill battle against tech, and we're, in a David and Goliath situation here where we've got an army of engineers that are really using this in a big way. But I think that the work that you're doing is making all the difference to the people that are paying attention and the people that are taking what you're saying seriously. And so I'm a fan, I'm a promoter, I'm grateful that you're doing what you're doing, and happy to have you on here.
Well, I'm so grateful to be on the show and to talk about this with your audience that clearly is interested in wellness and your amazing products. And yeah, it's just the beginning. So now's the time for people to start to reconsider where they're at, the types of lives that they want to lead, and life is short. So are you going to regret the amount of time that you spent on Facebook and dating apps, and what is truly important to you? And I think now, even during this pandemic, that perhaps might be a catalyst to help people really take a look at that more deeply. And so, yeah, I think this work's really important, and I'm excited to share it with more people. So thanks for helping with that.
Yeah, definitely, man. Thank you so much for being here. Tommy Sobel, everybody. We're at gobricknow.com is where they can find you.
Yeah, and Go Brick Now on Instagram. I also share some stuff from Tommy Sobel on Instagram. Yeah, join us.
Good stuff. All right, folks. That's a new perspective.